千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. I am very excited today to welcome back Bill Bunting, who has agreed to give us another one of his talks. So I'm going to switch on over to Bill's side.
Thank you, sir. And good morning or afternoon or evening, everybody, wherever you happen to be at the moment. I know we have people spread out all over, and so that greeting is perhaps somewhat appropriate. Here in scenic Westfield, Indiana, it's actually spring, finally, which is, as you all know, my favorite time of the year. I have to confess that while I appreciate the changing of the seasons and the meaning that can be inferred from that, I am not a cold weather person. I very don't like the cold. And these days I take a ton of medication that control my heart and blood pressure and other things, and I cannot warm up for anything. I feel like I'm cold from the inside out, and so I spend the vast part of majority of the year in an insulated sweatshirt and every layer of clothing I can find. That said, Mother Nature has once again decided to grace us with the renewal of life in Indiana that is spring. And it truly is a beautiful sight to see. Let's see if I can get my presentation to cooperate. There we go. When I have my talk shot down by technical difficulties. You know, like I was saying, once again, we've been afforded the rather singular privilege of living to see another spring. And every year I talk about this, even before I retired from teaching. Every year I talked about spring and early spring because it is such a wonderful thing to see. And every year, starting in early March, I start looking for the robins, the migratory birds here in Indiana that don't show up until it's warm enough for them to be here. And every year when I see that first robin, I remember the cyclical nature of the Tao and of life. I have a mating pair of robins that build a nest in my tree in the front yard every year. And one of them, the smaller of the two, I've always considered to be just a bit underweight and kind of scrawny. And so I take particular care to try to feed this little guy because I want him to put on some weight. And every year he doesn't seem to do it, but he's one of the best fed robins you'll ever see. and every year I wait to see this little guy return. And this robin and I have kind of a special relationship. I don't actually interfere with his existence in any way, but he's gotten accustomed enough to my presence in proximity to his nest that he'll come right up to where I sit on the front porch when I'm watching him and sit there and look at me and wait for me to feed him and those sorts of things. And I'm always amazed that happens. This is the third year now that this has occurred, and it's always this same little robin. And I wonder, gee, what does that little guy remember? I'm watching the desolation of winter give way to grass and green leaves on the trees and flowers. I've seen my first dandelion for the year. A lot of people think dandelions are to be annihilated because they're lawn weeds, and okay, maybe they are, but I kind of think they're pretty, and I don't kill them. Our homeowners association has given me some grief for that in the past, but I kind of think they're pretty. So I filled up my bird feeders, and they're full of birds. I have a wild rabbit now that's figured out that I have bird seed in the front yard, and so it comes around and, you know, it's munching on the vegetation in the front yard and swiping bird seeds. This year I have a chipmunk who's figured out that I'm feeding the birds out there and has come around to swipe his fair share of bird seed. And I'm watching all of this go on. You know, I'm watching the birds building their nests in my tree, and I'm watching the tree bud out and get ready to come into full leaves. And I'm watching this process of life renewing itself all around me, and it's really a very cool thing to see. And that's happening all over North America right now. So wherever you are, if you're in the continental U.S., something is happening in the way of the renewal of life, because it's spring. This morning, let's take just a few moments as I'm talking to you here to be thankful for the spring and the beauty that it brings and the renewal of that life and the lessons that brings us as we study the Tao and how it works and what it means and what it does in our lives. Pardon. Chapter 40 of the Daodejing says, the returning is the movement of the Tao. The weak is the utilization of the Tao. The myriad things of the world are born of being. Being is born of non-being. For such a short chapter, Lao Zi said so much that is truly profound in these 4 lines that I can't even begin to describe all of it in half an hour. It can't be done. But the line that always comes to my mind when I talk about change and evolution and the movement through my own life and watching the movement of others' lives is line 1. The returning is the movement of the Tao. That line has so much import, and yet, because we're all focused on trying to get through the day, so often we fail to consider where it is we're really going. Eventually, everything returns to its source. Everything. We get out of bed in the morning and look in the mirror, and we tend to perceive ourselves in terms of our physical presence, our bodies, and the personalities encapsulated in that physical form in this existence. And we forget that there's so much more to us than just what we see in the mirror. And because we tend to see ourselves in that light, we tend to think about our returning as the returning of the body to the earth. And that is one aspect of the returning. Everything on this planet one day will return to its source. And the source of everything that we know of in this existence ultimately is the earth. But what about that part of us that transcends death, the returning of the body to the earth? Where does it go? Where does it wind up? What happens to it? How often do we stop to consider where that is and what that means? The ultimate returning for us is the return to the void, the Tao itself, the source of all things from the very beginning of time. And that returning is not destruction or annihilation, but rather it's recycling on a cosmic scale. We talk about the end result of our karmic path, the effect of our karma on us, both in this lifetime and future lifetimes. But so often we manage to miss the implication of the future lifetimes because we don't consider really what's going to happen when we're released from this physical presence. For some reason, we're able to talk about future lifetimes in terms of everybody else. Oh, that guy's karma is going to catch up with him next lifetime. But we never discuss that in terms of ourselves. For some reason, we all believe that both karma and death are going to give us a pass. That everybody else is going to be taken, but we're going to dodge that bullet. I'm here to tell you we're not. And that's okay. There's a pervasive certain terror that occurs in human beings when they consider their own mortality, when they consider that returning. And in this country, the vast majority of people have been brought up believing that when they die, following that, there's some kind of a process of judgment. And according to the New Testament, none of us qualifies for a position in the Judeo-Christian heaven. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Salvation is by faith and by grace, not by works, lest any man should boast. The old gospel trail in the book of Romans. And so perhaps a certain amount of anxiety over that returning is natural because we've all had it drummed into us since we were infants. But is that really the truth? Is there an alternative, perhaps, that doesn't involve that? Is there an alternative that makes sense in light of what we can observe? And the Taoist teachings, in fact, are one of multiple alternative schools of thought that are equally as possible as any form of divine judgment. I take a great deal of comfort in my faith in the actions of karma, that what I did and why I did it in this lifetime will influence perhaps where I wind up in a future life, but more often than not, where those consequences, both positive and negative, kind of catch up to me in this one. And I try to live a life where those consequences by and large are positive and where the negative ones aren't catastrophic. I won't say I haven't had a good catastrophe or two. Oh boy, have I ever. But I try to learn from those. I take comfort in the truth of cosmic recycling. That philosophy makes a lot of sense to me. I can observe that as I watch the seasons change here in front of my house. I can observe it as my children grow and as I age. And I can see that process at work in the things that we think we own and the homes that we live in, the land that we occupy, all of the things that we think are ours that really and truly are not. And I realize that on a microcosmic scale, that very same process is at work. For those of you that have dogs and cats, you know that their life expectancy is much shorter than our own. And eventually, although we love them dearly, they wind up passing on us, and it's sad, and you know, it creates a lot of grief in our lives for a while. But we also realize that that's part of the natural order, and there's comfort in that knowledge. So, you know, for me, I can consider a reality with no heaven or no hell and no personified God. Just a set of immutable natural principles, natural laws that have maintained the order and balance in the universe since time began. And for me, I find that comforting. And every spring, as I look out my front door, I'm reminded that those natural laws are still at work. Day and night continue to follow each other. Spring follows winter. Life follows death, and the cosmos continues to move. It always has, as far as we know, it always will. And if a day comes where it doesn't, that will be because it is following a set of natural laws and principles that we as yet are unaware of. And so I would encourage each of you to rejoice in this renewal of life, in the returning of another cycle of spring, in the beauty of this existence and everything that happens around it. I'd encourage you to be grateful for the privilege of seeing another day as the world renews itself now in springtime. I'd encourage you to remember that, today's a gift, not a promise. Right? We all assume tomorrow's going to get here. But for some of us, tomorrow isn't going to get here. So use today wisely and give thanks for it and revel in it. And, be joyful. And the first Kung Fu Panda movie, which I really just enjoyed something fierce. Right before the old turtle passes, he tells Po that yesterday's history and tomorrow's mystery, but today is a gift, and that's why they call it the present. For an animated cartoon movie, that was a really nifty little bit of wisdom that they found a way to put in there. And so for every day that we get, be grateful and be lighthearted and rejoice because you got to see it. There's always a reason to be grateful and joyful. There's always a reason for joy and for peace. There's always a reason to be the better person we hope to be. Even if we're not always successful, there's always a reason to try. We just have to look for that reason sometimes and learn to appreciate it. The entire universe moves in cycles. That's an absolute truth. And those cycles are things that we can observe very largely. We may not be able to see them all, but we ought to be able to observe enough of them to realize that the cyclical movement of the universe and the earth and our lives is a reality. It's observable, it's factual, it exists just as surely as anything that you can see and touch. And so the thought that our lives would be any different than all of the other lives we see moving in these natural cycles for me is incomprehensible. Our lives are not different than the lives of anything or anyone else. But from that, I'd say we can derive a certain peace and comfort in the knowledge that things are exactly the way that they're supposed to be. That the cycles of the universe are continuing to move. The earth hasn't stopped rotating around the sun. Our atmosphere hasn't fallen off. Gravity still works. It's not just a good idea, it's the law. And so are so many other things. And so perhaps the laws that govern our existence, the principles that make up the Tao of heaven, are still at work. And everything is as it should be. For me, that's a reason to rejoice and be happy. And I hope for all of you it can be as well. Guess I underestimated my time just a tad. But, that's okay too. Thanks so much for letting me share with you. It's nice to be here now and again. And I hope something I said may have been helpful.
Bill, thank you so much. And speaking of life, I want to touch on the issue of life and death that you brought up today, the one thing that really stood out for me was the question. It's a timeless question that humanity has asked itself since the beginning. And that question can be perhaps be phrased as, where do you go when you die? And so in your talk, Bill, you've spoken of returning to the Tao. The Tao is the great return, and I liked how you tie that together with the changing of seasons. You know, we're now seeing the return of spring. So the great return is the function, the movement, the action of the Tao. So it reminds me that there was a lengthy discussion that I had with a group of people about that very topic. It always comes up, especially with those who are really into philosophy, you know, people who like to ponder this question, where do you go when you die? So the question that I have raised with that group was to consider the possibility, what if you don't go anywhere in the conventional sense when you die? I asked that question because we all have this cultural idea, this notion that, you know, if you're good, you go to heaven, this heavenly realm. And if you are not so good, you go to the other place. So these are places that people think they go, but what if you don't actually go anywhere when you die? So one of the questions that I immediately received, you know, this was meant to stimulate one's thinking and get you to contemplate the possibility. But one of the questions that this inspired was, hey, Derek, what do you mean I don't go anywhere when I die? Does that mean I simply cease existing? What if that means I, you know, no longer exist? And I said, well, not necessarily. Now, these are a group of fairly young people. So I said, think about a different paradigm of living, dying, rebirth, etc. A different paradigm than what we've been used to, which is to travel from one place to another, and which is what I meant when I say, you know, when you die, you go to heaven. If you are not so good, you go to the other place. It's a travel paradigm that you take yourself, whatever that self is, from one place to another. But what if it's a different paradigm? So at that point, I pretty much lost everybody, so I had to explain. This group of young people, the vast majority of them, like probably the young people that you know, the young people in your lives, they're really into video games. You know, everybody's got the Xbox, the Nintendo, etc. So I said, well, you know, you guys enjoy Call of Duty. You guys enjoy these games where you play. These are massive games online where you play with your buddies. And when you play in them, you know, you form a team, you have a mission, you battle other teams. So you basically live and die in this game environment. So in that particular game, maybe Call of Duty or something similar, where do you go when you die in the game? Then those of you that know people that play or have played yourself, you know the answer. The answer is, well, I don't really go anywhere. You know, maybe I'll get up from the couch. Maybe I'll take a break. If I've been playing around that game for quite some time, maybe I need a break. You know, maybe I'll do something else for a while, make a sandwich, make a coffee, whatever. After a while, when I feel ready, I will re-enter the game. I will respawn. When I respawn into the game, I'll need to grab my weapons and then I rejoin my team and continue on my mission. Perhaps I was assigned the duty of frontal assault, so I'll do that. I'll do that for my team. Perhaps I was assigned as a sniper, so I'll do that for my team, etc. So it goes on. It goes on and on until at some point you die again. and the whole thing repeats. So in that paradigm, there isn't a place that you go to that's a different place than where you are. It's always the same place. Suppose you apply that to the Tao. Suppose you just are, just like the Tao just is, so that you don't actually go to a different place because you've always been there. You're always there. You've always existed. You will always exist. And after this existence in the mortal plane comes to an end, like the game Call of Duty or some similar game, you don't actually go anywhere. Perhaps you take a break. And when you feel ready, you respawn again. Because, the mission for you and your team continues. In the greater world, perhaps your mission is to help other people find their way in life, help them reach the same realization that you've reached, so that they too can go forth and help even more people. So then it goes on and on. So not suggesting that this is the way it actually works, but I do want to suggest that this is something that we can contemplate as a possibility. It's a paradigm that's, I think, suitable for today's world, and certainly suitable for the younger people who can identify with exactly everything that I'm saying immediately. So it's interesting how life works. It's also interesting, by the way, that there is a new trailer for a new Star Wars movie that just dropped on the internet, already getting hundreds of millions of hits, hundreds of millions of views. The new movie is called The Rise of Skywalker. And at the very end of the trailer, you hear the voice of Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill, who says off screen in a narrator voice, "No one is ever really gone." Interesting synchronicity to what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. One of the wonderful things about the Tao teachings is that it is open to all of those possibilities.
Exactly. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.